my next bit here is about the battle of the wingmen. You mentioned you were going to talk about Bottas, so this is probably your chance. Yeah, the Mercedes versus Red Bull wingman thing is in an interesting phase, isn't it? It's really quite subtly interesting because we've had a few conversations about this various races and, Perez is really putting it together and Bottas has got to step up his game and, but Bottas has done well here and Perez has been a bit disappointing. It's not really that decisive and it's quite exciting. In the race, Perez was a bit hard done by, really. He had a very slow stop to begin with, and then was pitted too late when it came to the rain. It had really started coming down by that point. I think he was like lap 50 or something, and it was just, it was too late. That said, his qualifying was underwhelming, as I mentioned earlier. P9 in qualifying.
Yep.
Perez has not qualified in the top 6 in the last 4 races. Ooh. So that makes his recent form in what is arguably the best car on the grid extremely poor.
Terrible.
Bearing in mind that, George Russell has got a P2 and a P3 in qualifying. I don't think Perez... What is Perez's best qualifying result? I think it's Imola, P2, isn't it?
I shall have a look whilst you talk about him.
But yeah, look it up for me. I seem to recall he did pretty well there. So yeah, he had an all right P5 in Italy, and he had like a P8 in Zandvoort the time before. Obviously, he started from the pit lane. It wasn't quite the clinical kind of charge all the way through that we might have hoped for. Qualified P16, of course. He threw away 3 points in Belgium by crashing on the lap to the grid. He could have just stayed where he was and just got some 3 points because nobody raced. He qualified slower than Gasly at that race as well, and has qualified slower than Gasly on a fair number of occasions now. He did have a good P4 in Hungary, but the opening crash was not his fault at all, of course. Silverstone, he qualified all right. He got to P5, but then binned it in the sprint and was P16 in the race and was lapped by his teammate. He's just been all over the place. It feels like we're a world away from his 8 out of 9 top 6 finishes up to Austria, because that's where he was. He started the season very strong.
Yep.
He won in Baku, of course. He got a podium at Paul Ricard. We were like, they've vindicated in their decision. Red Bull have made the right decision. It's Perez. Bottas, on the other hand, landed P5 today. It's hard to say that that's because of a particularly solid performance, though. He didn't do badly, but he was decidedly bogged down for quite a lot of the race. The supposed tactic to hold Verstappen behind didn't work at all. Verstappen just blew past him really easily. It's kind of amusing that he did eventually end up P5, because when his engineer told him about lap 20 that a top 5 finish was on the cards, it didn't really look like it at all. He was struggling behind Vettel for quite some time. That was what was happening at that point. We heard Toto getting on the radio and saying something like, pass the cars ahead for points or something. It's like, is that how racing works? And then, but then the rain came along and he gained 9 positions. So, he did end up P5, but it wasn't because he was doing what Verstappen was doing. That's for damn sure.
I'm not the biggest fan of Bottas this week, and he's had such an interesting couple of weeks. And I just want to shout, for everyone listening,
Bottas.
I don't always, I don't like to always criticize Bottas. And in Monza, I was very complimentary of him because he went from the back of the grid and finished P2 and didn't get asked about his amazing performance on the podium and just got asked to comment on the 2 leaders' crash. And it was like, this guy's just done a Hamilton-esque performance and nobody cares because 2 people have binned it into turn 1. So I've got this little paragraph, if you don't mind. I'm just going to talk about Bottas a little bit. So I'll ignore the bit where I say it's my time to talk about Bottas and his performance. Blah, 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 blah. So there was a lot of speculation as to why he took an engine penalty to start with. And obviously we don't tender or tamper to rumours on this podcast. But throughout the whole season, we've not really heard of any woes for the Mercedes engine. They've been solid with reliability and performance. And at no point has Bottas or Lewis said that they're going to need to take a new engine coming into the rest of the season. I still think Lewis could get to the end of the season on the 3 engines he's already got. I don't think he will need to take a penalty because of the reliability. But we'll push that aside. Bottas has been given he's starting from the back of the grid because he's taken an engine penalty, so he's got his 4th power unit. Do you think this was a tactical move by Mercedes to A, give Bottas the best chance of the rest of the season with a fresh power unit, and to B, he was always going to start ahead of Max Verstappen because Max was starting from the back of the grid because he didn't qualify, but also he had a 3-place grid penalty, so that was always going to put him behind anyone else who didn't qualify or took any penalties due to engines. So do you think that was a bit of a tactical move to keep Bottas ahead of Verstappen and maybe cause some disruption alongside giving him a fresh engine?
I assumed that was a given, to be honest. I think Toto Wolff was interviewed about it before the race, and I can't remember who it was that was interviewing him, but they said something along the lines of Bottas has taken an engine penalty, he's there, he can hold up Verstappen or whatever. And I don't think Toto was like, oh no, that's not why we've done it or anything like that. And like you say, there doesn't seem to be any particular technical reason for him to take a new engine because he had one fairly recently already. So I just assumed it was a given. It was put him close to Verstappen and hold him up as long as possible. Let's put Valtteri Bottas, a guy who's not really known for his defending, to stop Max Verstappen, one of the most aggressive drivers on the grid. I assumed that was a given. It's a terrible strategy, but I assume that's what they did.
Well, it clearly didn't work. On a side note, did you see Bottas's Instagram story of him standing in front of, basically a graveyard of engines, clearly not amused that he'd taken this grid penalty and was starting from the back of the grid?